This is a pleasure for me to introduce Curtis. Curtis was here at BYU not very long ago. In fact, we were trying to decide if he left in 2002 or 2001. I don't think we ever decided. 2002 he left. He was an undergraduate here, spent a lot of time in the Kennedy Center, and he worked for me as an assistant. And I think I have to give a general introduction by saying Curtis is one of the kindest, most thoughtful people that I know. He's very thoughtful and very kind, and very considerate of others. And that is, we don't talk enough about that. We often like to talk about degrees and stuff like that, which I maybe will mention here. But most importantly, he is just a genuine human being and a good friend. He went on his first field study internship to Fiji, where he worked on a Fiji distance learning program there. Did you meet your wife there? No. Sort of. Okay, he did. So if you want a wife, then go on a field study. No, just kidding. He met his wife there. And then also, I was trying to decide, you also went on another field study to South Africa and Zimbabwe back when you could go to Zimbabwe without worrying about your life. But was that before you were married? Yes. Okay, so then he went on a pre-marriage trip with his wife, because Sage went on that one with you as well, didn't she? Right. They had a small group. Sage seems to be following Curtis around, or maybe it's the other way around. Curtis left here and went on and got an MPA, or actually it's public affairs, is that the degree? And focused on NGO management, for those of you who are interested in development. And is presently finishing up a PhD at Indiana there in sociology. And with any further ado, let's turn the time over to Curtis Child.
Good afternoon. It's really nice to be here. I'm not sure that I've actually been in this room since I graduated, and I have a lot of fond memories. I remember we, meeting the people who would work here, would have an annual international studies program, prom. That was a prom like you did in high school, only here we were adults, and we were sober, but we were very fun-loving, and we'd push the chairs back. We'd assign a matchmaker who would put us all together, and we'd go out for pizza and come back here and dance the Macarena under the austere gaze of David Kennedy. And I have other memories of this room and this building as well. Some are pure joy. Kyler singing to a box of Sara Lee brownies. Steve doing river dance at the Christmas talent show. And we even had an office mascot that I'm not sure whether any of our superiors knew, but it was a hermit crab. And he'd often escape, and he'd go behind some filing cabinet or down some hallway, and he'd always reappear some hours later, to our delight. But it wasn't all fun and games. I was actually a pretty serious student here, and it was here actually on this campus that, and it was often in this building that I felt intellectually moved in a profound way. I have lots of memories of listening to lectures in this room. And they were given by studied men and women, and having long, sometimes hour-long conversations with Dave, sitting downstairs talking social change with Chris Meek, or even as a very young student, listening with fascination as Ralph Brown told us that the social world was constructed, and that if we looked around, the real world was overlaid with the veneer of traditions and ideologies, and norms, and that careful sociological questioning could help us see through it all, or at least try and make sense of it all. I also remember studying here late at night. I would study here so often that I became quite fond and had a nice warm relationship with the nighttime building manager. And I clearly remember one night sitting downstairs and working through some statistics problems and having an epiphany of sorts. It was a mathematical epiphany, if you can imagine. And this had never happened to me before, and it's rarely happened since, but it was remarkable. And this this thing we call the university was really, really exciting to me. And it was here at the university, especially in this building, that I found people thinking and doing. And they weren't just professors and alumni or diplomatic officials on the way up to the church office building. They were my peers. They were traveling to faraway places, coming back with fabulous stories, sometimes sad, sometimes heroic, but always captivating. Here was Jamie just coming back from working with orphans in Romania. There was Suze off to South Africa, Blaine headed to India or Thailand, Steve coming back from Tanzania, Sarah planning for Mexico, Malcolm off to Guatemala. So perhaps this is simply nostalgia, but I felt that there was really something marvelous about this place, and there was something that connected the people who were associated with it. And it wasn't just some surface-level interest in traveling around the world. These were people who were deeply interested in people and the world that was going on around them. They were interested in things beyond BYU, beyond Provo, and often beyond the borders of the nation. So they read and they studied and they talked and they planned and they went and they did things. And the common denominator was their deep interest in the world, and then their travels were simply sort of outgrowths of that. So as a student here, I soaked it up and I loved it. So my question to you today is, does any of this resonate with you? Have you, in a manner of speaking, had this mighty change of heart and mind? And I'm talking about an intellectual awakening, a love for the university, a love for knowledge and understanding, and a deep interest in what's happening in the world and what your contribution to it might be. So if that's the case, then I hope my comments are especially for you. One of the main points that I want to make today comes actually in the form of a question. That's this. What if all of this fascinates you? When I say this, the stuff that takes place around here in the Kennedy Center. What if you've listened to other speakers at this microphone and you've heard them come here and talk about their field studies experiences, how these experiences opened doors for them, many cases led them down successful paths, working in some international field like international development or whatever, and you're captivated by the idea of working internationally, but for whatever reasons, it's not in the game plan. Maybe it's your health, maybe it's family situation, or other personal reasons. But what if, for whatever reason, the international career isn't going to work out for you? What are your options? Well, I have good news, and it's based on the premise that what brings you here and in conversation with the faculty here and students and the programs associated with the center is a deep interest in people and communities and in finding ways to benefit them. So for those of you who have been on field studies, for those of you who might be thinking about field studies or some type of international program, I want you to consider whether what motivated you was simply an interest in sort of traveling around the world, or whether you're motivated by some fundamental desire to understand what is going on in the world and to find a way to contribute to it in some positive way. Recall my earlier conclusion that was, for me, the remarkable thing about this place. This wasn't just a meeting place, sort of an academic travel club. It was a place where people shared an interest in the world around them. They wanted to sort of do something about it. If this is the case, and I hope it is, then rest assured that you have many options available to you for meaningful careers, and many of them may keep you right here in the United States. What I think you're seeking is not just a well-stamped passport, but a career that you can devote to learning about, understanding, hopefully improving the lives of the people around you. So it's within this context that I want to talk about graduate schools and particularly graduate programs outside of international development, because I think, at least in this lecture series, you've probably heard a lot of that, and a lot of people have come back and had experiences related to that. When I was a student here, it seemed like if one was interested in doing something sort of meaningful and important, then the obvious next step was to find some degree in international development, and you could do that. And that seemed especially the case for those of us who had sort of been and done international work and were really interested in it. It wasn't until years later that I sort of separated in my mind the excitement of travel from the meaningful work of development, like I'm asking you to do. And instead of asking, how can I go and do international development work, I changed the question to, how can I find a meaningful career that will help me to find some deep satisfaction like I found when doing development type of work. So, where are we headed? I've talked a bit about my experience here generally as a student. I want to talk about my field studies, and then I'll talk about my post-BYU education in 2 different graduate programs, and I'll use this as an opportunity to get on my soapbox about graduate school. And I want to spend some time on this last point since I assume that many of you have come here for that reason, to sort of think about and talk about graduate school. Okay, so when in about 1989, 1999, I worked with there was a graduate student named James Jacob. In fact, I think he's coming to speak next week. And he was putting together a project in the Fiji Islands. There's a LDS technical high school there, and these are the grounds, if you can imagine. The idea was to provide some post-high school practical training for college-age Fijians. And I was taking a course from Dave Schuler at the time. He sort of recruited me, and we went. It was a marvelous experience. Here's some of the students we worked with. These were many members of the Mormon Church, many who had served missions, had come back, and were struggling to find useful employment. And so what we did, we worked with the University of South Pacific, BYU Hawaii, and the Independent Study Program here on campus to help give them some training that would also give them credits and a certificate that they could take then and use either to advance their education or to go and get a better job than what was available to them at the time. Here's a picture of graduation. And as with all international type of work, the real benefit is the people that you meet. On the top, we have a group of friends who are taking us up to a sacred actual burial ground for their village, and below is a pot of swordfish curry. And to this day, I still can't. I dream about this meal. I still can't get over it. And if for no other reason, you go to Fiji and meet the Lals and have them cook you this every Sunday afternoon, and you'll have the same experience. I honestly can't get over it. And so I wanted to show you a picture of that. It is dear to my heart. And likewise, so other friends that we made and interactions that I had while there. Okay. A couple of years later, when I was graduating from BYU and thinking about graduate school, another opportunity presented itself. A small group of students and I worked with an international literacy organization to train literacy teachers, literacy educators, on how to use a new manual that merged literacy training with social action, and we had a new manual that was based around HIV/AIDS, and so it would be a chance for learners to learn literacy skills, useful literacy skills, but also learn something about the HIV/AIDS epidemic that was, and it is so problematic right now in South Africa. So here's the members of the NGO that we worked with there. Every morning would start with song and dance. And again, working with wonderful people. I do. This is Cindy, and I actually brought my journal. I've taken a trip down memory lane the last few days in preparing this, and I just wanted to read you a section of the sort of profound experiences that I had, and I think that sort of many of you may have had or may desire to have. Here it is, if you'll indulge me. So you get a peek into my book of life. We went home with Cindy. This is Cindy. She lives in Hammersdale, a black township about 45 minutes by taxi outside of Durban. Her home is actually in an informal settlement just outside the border of town, a squatter camp that has no real official status. Some years ago, Hammersdale was the location of brutal violence between black political parties, the ANC and the IFP. This political fervor was not particular to Hammersdale, and I gather was typical in most townships and still is to some degree. These parties fought for power, which fighting turned to violence. As the sky was turning dark, we stopped at an empty lot on top of a gentle hill. Small cement homes could be seen in the distance, and across the street was her secondary school, where, as a schoolgirl, she saw her teacher shot dead in front of her class. Apparently, rival party members were exchanging gunfire, and one ran into the school. The other unloaded bullets through the school windows in an attempt to kill him. It was one of these bullets that killed her teacher. The area where we were at marked the line between the IFP and the ANC-controlled parts of the township, and was therefore a place of much violence. Once there was shops where we stood, but violence had killed business. Cindy told us about the awfulness of such a life, the burning alive of victims, the slaughtering of children, how far. For her, it was real life. Unlike our experience this far in Durban, we felt our white skins poignantly in the township. After 3 taxi exchanges, we stopped at a store and made our way down a muddy path at the top of a hillside overlooking a shallow valley. The township itself lighted, but the electricity stops where the informal settlement begins, and only people in the area who have light in those areas are those that steal it. Cindy is a single parent, and her mother, father, and siblings are now dead. She has 4 young children and cares for 2 or 3 more. The home they all live in is made of cold cement and cinder block. Metal is the roof, and at night rats crawl around the ceilings. There are 3 rooms divided by hanging lace, a center for cooking, and the 2 ends for sleeping, each about 10 by 8 feet. There was no tables, but there are beds. It was a dismal place in the evening, cold and wet. We went for a long walk with Cindy. We talked about life in the settlement, how she enjoys the community feeling, that she knows her neighbors will help her out wherever she needs anything. We discussed AIDS. She says that her church is having a funeral every week. These type of experiences really have an impact on a person, and it's hard to walk away from that and feel like you can just sort of go back to life as usual. And it was really a remarkable time for me. Later, we traveled to Zimbabwe. This is a monument where in 1998, an activist basically came out and said that she had AIDS, which is not always that common in South Africa, and she was killed there for doing so, and so a monument was erected to her memory. Okay, so we left South Africa and headed up to Zimbabwe. As Dave said, things were at that time just actually starting to get pretty rough. The nation was not only suffering under HIV/AIDS epidemic, but Robert Mugabe just started his land redistribution policies, and basically the beginnings of drought and starvation were being seen when we got there. Through it all, though, there were small NGOs trying to make a difference, cope with the hungry and sick people who were coming to them for assistance. I just want to read, let me just read one more short passage. We went to a place called Bulawayo. He says, I said, the people at Bulawayo were good to us. Linus, the scrawny, short assistant manager, spoke of doing education for life in one of the rural areas. He described it as terrible. People camped out waiting for food. They were excited, thinking the AIDS material he brought was food for them. Even Fari, who drove us down, said he had to reduce his SUDSA intake from 2 to 1 meal a day. And then, last one, I promise. We bought a blanket from a blanket wall hanging from Enos, one of the tutors. It was he who we interviewed yesterday on home organic gardening. He was small framed, his watch hanging loosely on his wrist. Stell told us today his wife died of AIDS. That would mean that he most likely also is HIV positive, although from our conversation he seems to be denying it. With his wife passed, he has been left to raise and care for Kundai, his 18-month-old son, who also has a high chance of being HIV positive. Kundai in Shona meant defeat. Originally the name was meant to refer to the obstacles Enos and his wife defeated to marry and have him. But now I wonder if the name was given prophetically and as a metaphor for all the children of Zimbabwe. It was really again, a remarkable life-changing experience to work with these people. Here's some women bringing their wares in hopes of finding some way to sell them, earn a little bit of extra money. Here they're learning how to work with crops in a way that they can be a little more self-sufficient, not have to rely on the markets so much. Okay, so as a student here, I fell in love with the university, like I said, and these experiences had a profound effect on me. I'm not just talking about BYU, it was the university as an institution that impacted me so greatly. Despite this, I thought when I graduated I needed to get some sort of practical or applied training. And so through researching various programs, I became aware of a handful of professional programs like public administration, public policy, public affairs that seemed like they would meet the sort of thing that I was looking for. I applied to a number of them, and I ended up at Indiana University, their School of Public and Environmental Affairs, where I specialized in nonprofit management. When I got there, I started working with a professor who was an expert on researching nonprofit organizations, and I remembered how much I loved the university and remembered that I wanted to be there for my entire life. So I finished a master's program and started in a PhD program in sociology. So and that's where I'm at now. Okay, so having spent a good amount of time in two different types of programs, I want to spend the rest of my time talking about graduate programs and graduate school. And specifically, I want to talk about why and how to think of them. What you won't get from me is a list of tricks about how to get into graduate school. Let me explain. When I say tricks, I mean the peripheral and cosmetic must-dos in order to get in graduate school of your choice. Email so-and-so at the graduate school and say such and such. Format your resume in this way, not that way. Be sure to mention X, Y, and Z in your statement of intent. Do this and this because it looks good on an application, and so forth. I'm not totally opposed to these lists. I think they're sort of a dime a dozen, and certainly there's some aspects of them that you need to pay attention to because they follow sort of normal conventions of graduate school application. But I think that often students spend too much time thinking about those things, and in the long run, they probably improve your value only a little bit. Instead, what I do want to encourage you to do is to do the real thing. Engage with your studies, with your professors. Read, and read. Read broadly, read newspapers. Don't just read to pass tests or to fill an assignment, but to learn about the world and what people are saying about the world. Form opinions, be active, make yourself available to professors in your community. Don't wait for them to come to you. And then you won't only look good on an application, but you'll be good. And you'll be well prepared for future studies, you'll be talented, and most importantly, you'll have the productive life that you want to live. So, how and why to think about graduate school? The first question is easy. Why to think about graduate school? Graduate school, among all the other things it will do for you, will give you the tools you need to be productive agents in whatever field you choose. And you can even start developing these now. What do I mean by tools? To succeed, and I think this is especially important at a place like BYU where we place such a high value on being good people and having a strong work ethic, and these things are great and they're needed, but those alone won't get you to where you want to be. You need to have tools that people want and that people value. So what do I mean by that? Do you know languages? Do you have research skills? Can you use statistical programs? Or perhaps you can develop a survey instrument. Maybe you know how to perform qualitative analysis. Do you understand computers or programming? Can you write well? Can you write grants? Can you teach? Do you have business acumen? Can you keep the books? Do you know how to make business plans, read financial statements, and so on? Do you understand the law? Can you do legal research? Can you use legal cases to make arguments? The list could go on and on. What I'm talking about are real, concrete tools that make you valuable. And these are the things that graduate school, hopefully your undergraduate education, but especially in graduate school, you'll be able to develop. When I started at Indiana, I had really lofty ambitions. I wanted, me and the dozens of other students that started there wanted to change the world and make a big difference. And soon we found ourselves taking courses like statistical analysis for effective decision making, public management economics, public finance and budgeting, and it blew us away. We felt cheated and disheartened that we were spending thousands of dollars to learn these really boring and mundane things. It wasn't until we actually started applying for internships and going on the job market that we realized how valuable these things were. People with good intentions were a dime a dozen, but someone that knew how to develop, do a cost-benefit analysis were far and few between. Think about the types of jobs that you'd want to have doing what you would think of as important and meaningful type work. Indiana places a lot of students in the Environmental Protection Agency, the Government Accountability Office, which is basically the sort of research arm of Congress, the sort of watchdog for Congress. If you wanted to work for Catholic Relief Services or the Red Cross. Each of these needs someone, they need people who aren't just good and smart, they need people who are good and smart but also can come with a set of skills. And so why to go to graduate school? Well, there's lots of reasons, but the one I've tried to emphasize right now is that it's there that you can get some really concrete tools to allow you to have, to be the type of productive person you want to be in a career. Okay, now what I think is probably more important or maybe more interesting to you, let me say one more thing about the tools. There is something to be said about being a generalist and sort of keeping your options open. But you cannot be all things to all people all of the time. At some point you have to, my opinion is that at some point you have to recognize where you can add some value and really hone in on a set of skills. For a long time, I tried to walk many paths so that I could have all options open for me in the future. And at some point, I realized you just can't do that. What's needed is for you to develop some very specific skills. And as soon as you feel like, that's a commitment. So as soon as you feel like you can make that sort of commitment, then I would say hone in, go for it, and really be the expert in that, in whatever it is that you want to do. Okay. Now for how to think about graduate school. I want to suggest that there are generally three types of graduate programs, and I'm going to make some broad generalizations which will probably offend some people here or annoy others. And I'm confident that you'll be able to think of exceptions to everything I have to say, but I still think it's a useful way of thinking about graduate programs. Let me skip through this. Okay, so the first is the PhD program. How should you think about the PhD program? First and foremost, you should think of it as a degree that trains you to do research, and mostly academic research. It's best at preparing you for an academic job. They're not generally set up, especially in the social sciences, to funnel you into an applied field, although many people who have PhDs do end up doing applied work, and neither are they primarily set up to teach you how to be teachers at the college level, even though inevitably this happens and you learn how to be a teacher. But most academics just don't see that as their job. So what does this mean to you? When you think PhD, think research and lots of reading and writing. Can you go and get a PhD because you want to teach at the college level? Of course, but you won't be able to get away from the research. Can you get a PhD because you want to work in some applied field? Of course, but you may not want to tell your advisors that. Even in our public affairs program, the PhD students there, and you think of that as sort of a very applied sort of field, even they are scared to tell their advisors that they want to go work for the government, okay? Because the people at the university most of the time know what they know, and what they know is how to be academics, and they want to sort of carry on their legacy through you. That too, Chris, that too. So if you're not in it for the research and you're still committed to a PhD, you should just be aware that generally you're not going to receive a lot of support for your non-research-oriented, non-academic interests. These departments just aren't structurally designed to place you, for the most part, into applied fields. So if you wanted to do that, you'd have to be a little more entrepreneurial and creative about this. So it always makes me nervous when new PhD students come into Indiana University and they confess that they're really not that interested in research. They don't like to read a whole lot, and they would rather not write papers. Well, then they probably shouldn't have chosen that. And they're going to have, even if they could imagine 10 years down the road, it could be a great life as being a professor, they're going to have 8 years of misery trying to get through it all. So this is a really academic environment, and you shouldn't be surprised if people aren't always immediately concerned with what this means in the real world in a narrow sort of sense. Theoretical ideas and discussions are valued in that. So again, if you're the type of person that gets annoyed when people start talking about theory and ideas and want to say, well, what does this really mean? What does this really mean? And don't see any value in theory, then perhaps a PhD program isn't the type of thing that you would find meaningful or useful. They're isolating in a sense as well. It's unlike other programs. You do a lot of independent work. Generally the curriculum isn't based on group work and group projects, and they take a long time. You could expect in most PhD programs anywhere from 5 to 8 or more years. But you also can often receive funding for these. Okay. So the second type of program that I want to talk about is what I'll refer to as the professional program. Some are obvious. If you're interested in doing hands-on, applied work, then I would suggest that this is often the degree for you. They're designed to give you the necessary tools for working in a specific type of field. And the great thing about them is they're in departments in schools that are generally structured in a way that help you get to where you want to go. What I mean by that is they have institutional relationships with governments, with corporations, with large nonprofit organizations. They have internship programs, they have placement offices, and all these things make getting the job that you want a whole lot easier. So again, working on the assumption that you're interested in a life where you can engage in some sort of socially valuable mission, let me sort of give you a sense for what types of programs you could think about. Some are rather obvious. Think of medicine, not just being a doctor, but also in nursing or therapy, something like that. The law, often people think of working for a big firm, but there's lots of public interest law or advocacy organizations where you could use the tools, the legal tools you would develop in law school to do the type of work that sort of brings you here and around the Kennedy Center. MBA, I'm a little skeptical, but lots of the top MBA programs, Harvard, Columbia, Duke, Northwestern, they're all offering they want to market to you who want to not just make a profit, but do something good in the world too. So they have these different types of programs for working in the social sector. In any case, the tools of an MBA student, though, could usefully be applied in a lot of different areas. And those were what I thought is generally sort of the professional programs. And it wasn't so clear to me when I was sort of in your position that there were these other types of programs that now in retrospect I wish people were talking about more when I was here. And these are the public policy programs, public administrations, and public affairs programs. Let me give you a sense of what kind of jobs these might land you in. Think of doing something like working for the Environmental Protection Agency, the Office of Housing and Urban Development, working for your local city government and city management or something like that, working, as I said before, for the Government Accountability Office. These often government jobs that sound boring and bureaucratic, but that are actually pretty interesting and give you a chance to do interesting and meaningful work. They also do a good job. Many of these schools have placed you in large nonprofit organizations, and the nonprofit sector has been growing and growing over the last 10, 20 years. There's lots of jobs available for that. So I'm thinking of things like the Red Cross, Catholic Relief Services. There's you could even think about the arts and things like that. But as far as sort of human service type of organization. There's lots going on there, and this is actually sort of the new thing that all these administration programs are doing, is developing training in nonprofit management. Another one that I have been really interested in. My wife got a degree in public health, and I've been astounded at the type of work opportunities that have become available to people with public health degrees. There's lots of concern about various health problems, and there's just lots of different types of work you can do with a public health degree. Think about working for hospitals or state or local health departments, working for the Centers of Disease Control, the National Institutes of Health, the World Health Organization. And I skipped social work. I think Kat Robinson was here a while ago talking a little bit about social work. So when you think of these programs, think preparation for working in an applied field. It will probably cost a little bit of money up front, since generous scholarships are less common, but they only last a couple of years. They're going to land you in a better position, by which I mean a more satisfying position and generally a higher paying position than you could have done without that type of degree. My sense is that these are generally not programs where you sit around and pontificate about world problems or engage heavily in theoretical discussions. Even though that's sort of what I thought I was getting into, you probably won't do a lot of academic writing, although you may put together reports and memos and briefs. You may not be trained to do PhD-level research, but you'll be taught to consume it in a meaningful, responsible, and useful way. And you will get specialized training. You'll work on problem sets, often in teams, and the emphasis will be on getting you trained and out into the workforce. So if that's the kind of thing that strikes you as, yeah, that's what I want to do, then perhaps that's where you want to be. There's a third type of program, and I'm hesitant to talk too much about this because I don't even have a name for it, and I don't have a lot of experience firsthand, but I've been around a lot of people who have, and so I think I can make some general observations. I'm just calling them the academic master's programs. So what I'm thinking about are sort of terminal degrees like a master's of sociology, a master's of anthropology, lots of the area studies programs like Latin American studies, Russian studies, whatever. I believe that these can be tremendously useful programs, but you really need to think carefully about how you want to use them. In substance, my sense is they operate more like PhD programs in that you'll read and you'll write academically, you'll learn about history and politics and culture, and depending on the program, you may or may not develop a core set of tools and skills. But you certainly will gain a lot of experience in that particular field of study. What's tricky about these programs, what I think you need to be careful about, is that they don't always have an obvious output. So think about the PhD. The obvious output is to place you into an academic field. You can do other things. You can always do other things, but the sort of way the system works is to place you into an academic field. And you think about a professional program, the way these work is to place you into the profession for whatever you're being trained for. These types of programs are a little bit different. They're sort of somewhere in between, is my sense. But I do think they do a couple things really well, and that's why I mention them. First, they often do an excellent job of putting you into PhD programs. So if you're not an outstanding candidate right out of your undergraduate degree, a couple years in this type of program might give you a chance to hone some skills, do some independent research, and come back in a couple of years to applying to PhD programs with a much better position to excel in the PhD program. And second, my observation is that these programs have generally done pretty well at placing students in jobs who are interested in the foreign service or lots of the intelligence-related jobs, because often they're interested in getting a specialist who knows Kazakhstan and knows the culture, can read the newspapers and sort of knows what's going on, and that's what the CIA wants, is someone who can sit there and sort of be the Kazakhstan girl or the Kazakhstan guy. So, I have a couple minutes left. I want to leave some room for questions, but I promised that I wouldn't give you a list of tricks, but I do want to give you some advice about thinking about how to apply to graduate school. The first one is how should you think about applying to these different types of programs. What suits you best? If you're like me, you never know what you like, and it's always a really stressful thing because I don't know what I like. But the obvious answer is sort of to go with what you're interested in. And what I'm going to tell you is that's the wrong answer. Because if I'm interested in sociology, I could go get a PhD in sociology, a master's degree in sociology, or do some sort of master's of public policy degree, which is basically, can be thought of as like an applied sociology degree. Instead, I want to urge you to think of your temperament. What do you have a temperament for? Can you imagine yourself sitting in an office, reading a lot, writing a lot, and perhaps occasionally doing some field work, but mostly engaged in academic pursuits? If not, then the PhD might not be the wisest choice. Again, we have so many students come through Bloomington, Indiana, and it seems to me that they've misjudged their temperament. They know I really loved reading sociology books when I was young, but they didn't think about the temperament they had for doing that type of work and what it would require of them. Is your temperament such need to be engaged with problems in some tangible way, not just through research and writing, but through actually working with the people who you're hoping to serve in the end? If so, then maybe a professional degree is the best bet for you. Okay, my second piece of advice is to, when you apply to these programs, whatever they are, ask for a list of what recent graduates are doing. Okay, and as I said, you can do anything you want with your degree. I don't want to try and corner you and say that if you do this, you must do that. But look at this list and treat the patterns you see here as sort of the default expectation for where you're going to end up, barring some creative or entrepreneurial action of your own. Okay. Have an open mind too. Like I said, there's lots of really fascinating work in the public government sector. And what might seem as boring or lame at the outset, it could actually be some pretty interesting work. The third thing is to try it out. And this may sound obvious, but you should either visit the school or visit a school like it near you. Just sit in the classes for a couple of days. We've had a couple times now where people have moved their families out to Bloomington, invested tremendous resources in applying to jobs, turning down other opportunities, sat through a week of law school, and said, I don't want to do it. And that's okay. So they can go down a different path, but it was remarkably poor use of time and resources to sort of make those changes at the last minute like that. So it would be very easy to go sit in the law school for a couple of days and see if that's the kind of thing you have the temperament for. Again, you can think of what you could do way down the road. 30 years, I really love being an attorney, but if you can't stand 3 years of law school, then there's a problem. Okay, so I've tried to do a lot of things today, and let me just summarize what I hope you'll take away. One, I've tried to persuade you that there are numerous opportunities available to you. When I was here, and I don't know if it's the same now, but it seemed like lots of people were talking about international development. And I think that's great, but I just wanted to make available to you the idea that there are other types of work that you could do that that could reward you emotionally, intellectually, socially in the same way that doing international development type work could do for you. I've also tried to convince you that what you really need is a set of some skills that you're really good at. And these will certainly open up opportunities for you. I'm convinced of that. Finally, just a comment on my own field studies experience. There's not a clear link between what I did when I was sort of in your shoes and what I'm doing now, in the sense that I'm doing some type of international work or even international research. But again, I want to just come back to the point that but it was the meaning of the work that was important. It wasn't the geography of the work that was important. These types of experiences I had in Fiji and South Africa and Zimbabwe did instill in me some desire to do something meaningful and at least so I could feel like I was doing something important. And that's all I have. So I have a couple minutes. I know the hour technically ends at 10:02, so you're welcome if you have other places to go to leave. I won't feel offended. But if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them.
was going to ask you, I read an article in the Times, and then Professor Brown also sent it out to us in the email about people, they call them professional do-gooders, who are struggling finding, they get stuck in the field for 5 or 6, 7 years, and they get to this point and they don't feel like they've matured or grown up or something because of earnings potential and things like that. I'm wondering if you could comment on how you see the market for people who interested in development, advocacy, nonprofits, if you would echo the author's concern that there's an excess of people that just want to do that and there aren't the jobs for them.
Yeah, I've followed a lot of the stuff in my research, and it's hard to know exactly what the job market is like. But I do agree that there's lots of people. There is a surplus of people who have really good hearts, and so that alone I don't think is enough to warrant going down that path. What I feel really strongly is about that you have to have something that people need. There are jobs available in doing philanthropic, charity type work, but you need to have something that those organizations want. So yeah, so I would agree that I think there are a lot of people, and there's lots of programs now that sort of say, what can you do with this? You can go do good in the world, and that's great. But you make sure that if you did choose that you realize that your sort of good intentions won't be enough to help you succeed. What can you do? There's lots of things you can do. It doesn't have to be, I had a list of them. It could be more, but there's something that you can do that you could be really good at, and then people say, well, we need him to do this thing for us.
I've heard that in choosing master's programs, it's not so much important to choose like a school with a high ranking, but you want to find professors who are doing research in the fields that you're interested in. I don't know how true this is.
Yeah, I think it could go both ways, actually. On the one sense, there are some programs that just have a great reputation, either in name only, which has some value, but also just have a great reputation for training students well. And so you could go to these programs and turn out pretty well, even if there's not someone there who you would hope to work with. The danger in picking a program based solely on the individual, some great scholar, is that that scholar could leave. And if you put, if the only reason you went to Indiana University was to study culture and policy with Brian Steensland, and for no other reason, and then he doesn't get tenure or gets tenure and gets picked away by some other university, then you're sort of in a bind. So I think there's some balance between those two. Some schools just have a nice name recognition, but you have to be careful because you do want to really be trained well. So I would try and, as much as possible, do both. Find a school that's going to train you well, that even if that professor who you wanted to work with happened to leave, that you would have other opportunities available. Also, you could think of it in terms of, does that graduate program have sort of a specialty in the area that I'm interested in? So even if that particular professor leaves, Indiana University still does a lot of political sociology, so I'll be okay because there's other people doing that. I would be, if someone came to me and said, well, I'm going to go study at this university just because Ralph Brown is there, well, you said it, not me. It's a risky decision. It could turn out very well. And I know, for example, a student who did this. He was at Washington. He was in like neuroscience, and he worked with this one professor. And the professor was great, and he liked him. And so when the professor got stolen away to Indiana, he brought his graduate students with him. So things like that can happen, but it is risky, I think, to say I'm only going to go there because of this one professor. I think a balance is good, but I really think there's some departments that just do, regardless of what particularly good professors they have, just do a really good job of training students, and that's nice to have. I've been avoiding Chris, but I thought.
I'm not going to agree with you. Because why? But these students are going to leave, but they're going to have a certain misconception of things. First of all, I mean, what you're saying is true. Probably at the University of Indiana and many universities, that there's a tendency to become more and more narrowly disciplinary, and especially at BYU, and to also become less and less applied. But there are also many PhD programs out there, and especially in Europe, which want people who, I mean, your research is tied to your work in the field, and having just a set of things that you can do can screw you up. By knowing how to do certain technical things, you can end up in the field and what you're assigned to do. Like in the first case I had, I was supposed to resolve conflict relations between Hispanics and Latinos and blacks in a 5,000 person bulk mail facility in Southeast LA. And they were pulling knives on each other and shooting each other. And what good did cost benefit analysis do me in that situation? And I had to learn how to bring people together that hated each other's guts, to get them not to kill each other or not kill me as I got in between them. And I had to organize them so that the factory began to process mail, because they weren't processing mail all weekend long. So there's a whole world of changing. I mean, Utah's favorite Democratic candidate, Barack Obama, spent 12 years as a community organizer before he went to Harvard Law. And he was a law professor. So I think, you can oversimplify this. And I would say, I would argue, yeah, you should, professors do take students with them. That happens. I've seen it happen a lot. It's not something to bet on, but I wouldn't go to a program where they could give me good training, but there's no professor that I want to work with. Because you've got to have a sponsor or a mentor, somebody that's going to go shell out the cash, get the grants from the government to pay for you to go to school. Otherwise, you wouldn't be getting your PhD program, right?
Right.
So
Let me.
So anyway, I just think this, and I just oversimplifies it. And secondly, I mean, guys, my last thing is I have a real problem with public policy programs in general, because they lay out lots of policy and lots of paperwork, and they produce no change. And so, I can take you to numerous places where big files exist with grand projects were developed by policy analysis, and they didn't do a damn thing. Excuse me.
Well, it's nice to see you too, Chris.
You and Sarah Beckham are my two favorite students.
I'm touched. Let me just. I agree with you on a lot of points. You're right. I do agree that. I do agree that that you going to a graduate program without a sponsor would be difficult. I think it's more dangerous, though, to go to a graduate program that doesn't train people well, but just has a big name that you're interested in. So there's a balance there. The other point, you made a comment about not doing cost benefit analysis at at this jail where you were having knives pulled on you. Mail facility. So the
I did use cost benefit analysis, but that was secondary to my ability to be able to organize people and to figure out strategies of change and how to configure social organizations.
Right. But the point I think you missed is that's a skill. That.
But my boss would have had me sitting doing cost-benefit analysis all the time, and I would have never, ever resolved their problems if I wouldn't have ignored it.
Okay.
So, I guess what I'm trying to say is I taught myself cost-benefit analysis from a book, but I couldn't teach myself those skills of organizing and change from a book and a class.
Sure.
I have to do what you showed yourself doing.
Yeah, I agree. I do think, though, that there's something to be said for if you went into a job and they said, "What can you do?" and you said, "I don't know, but when I find a problem, I'm going to figure out how to solve it," you'd have a problem. You wouldn't be very marketable in that sense. So there's something to be said for having a set of tools that you can use, and if you need to apply them, you can. If you don't have to. You can innovate in other ways. But to say that, well, because these tools might not benefit me in some way, they're useless, I would say no. Go get the tools. If they don't happen to be useful in the job that you want to use, then you can innovate in other ways. But you have to have something initially to put you out there to say that I'm a capable person.
Right,
So.
But I guess in the last comment is what I would say, the way I focused my life at least, is I asked what problems, what issues am I interested in theoretically and in terms of activism? And then I went to those, I figured out what programs and skills I had to go get in order to tackle those things that I wanted to do. And so I had to have some overarching mission that I wanted to accomplish in my life, so I didn't become some professor sitting on his ass in his office doing trivial research until he became a senior professor and then stopped doing research because he wasn't interested in academics anymore.
Yeah.
I want to live a life that I have a mission until I die. I want a purpose in my life, and my occupation is central to that.
That's great. Let me just make one comment, and then I'm happy. And then you, no, and then yeah. Can we disinvite Chris to lunch? Chris, I think you're exceptional in that you knew the mission you wanted from the get-go, and not everybody has that. So if you're like me and you're still trying to figure out your mission in life, well, you can go get some training. And I've struggled to know. I didn't have that, and I don't think a lot of people do. For those that do, then you can frame it differently. But I don't think any of that really goes against what I was saying, even if I did simplify it.